Pretty good.
Yeah.
Running around.
Yeah.
Yes. Gentlemen. Oh, man, sorry, didn't see you sitting there. Yes.
How you doing?
Good. That's okay. All good.
Have you guys in the fish were biting and?
Well, they were biting this afternoon later, but yeah. Always. Always.
I just traffic in general on the go, it seems like it's.
Yeah, last couple of weeks. It's been- Oh, most of the last- we can see that it's- It's coming out. Go back where it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Skating day.
Hey, Ron. Good.
What do you?
Busy. Busy, you been in the sun too.
Yeah,
It's been pretty warm out here today.
it's nice, it's a nice day.
Yeah.
You're fine.
78 in our house. They were saying 80 in one city.
What about the weekend, is it gonna be a nice weekend?
Yeah.
Pressure's off after Friday,
Yes.
pressure's all off after Friday.
Yeah.
We either failed or. Done well.
Oh. Secret not.
Yeah.
Hello, how are you, Marilyn? I'm Ron.
Hello? You know, Roy, you did send that to me once.
Yeah.
I saw, but I did look at it again.
You know, right?
Back soon.
I thought I'd like mention it.
So what cane was your name then? Was it a dinosaur?
How are you? My mother didn't
How are you?
away from my sister. Pretty sure. When I heard of it, was a real confused, I was 6.
Yeah.
My sister.
Where did you do that?
We have plenty. We'll make it work.
That's a lot. Ow.
Still crafting, it still looks like.
Yeah, there's a lot, but that's actually for a house.
Albert,
Huh?
Albert.
Yeah.
Anyway, go back to my own story. My sister went to kindergarten, she came home one day and said, I've got the baby. She begged something in it.
Our grandson is named Israel.
I've got a great nephew in the
And then, we have a granddaughter, her name is Juno.
yeah.
I think they never did
The
that.
answer would be my great niece, privileges. Is my grandnephew, grandniece is from Manon. Manon.
Family, growing family, new family, are not doing what nine. We're living after the parents. Well, we know.
Dynastic name.
It'd be the third, my brother, the third.
Get for it. String going. And it was like.
No, I'm so glad it's this, and they wouldn't tell anyone until the baby was born, what the name was, just. So, I mean, we knew the sex, they knew the sex, and we told everyone the sex.
You thank goodness you don't live in Germany.
Right.
In Germany, you cannot give a child a name that's not in the
But not in
They
the.
have a book of book. Respect.
In France, they have some.
But in a way, that's an important consideration, because I can remember that I was, working before, and I used to have a lot of residents.
Good evening.
Hi.
Residents, and I look at the name, and they've been having a weird name, I don't want to say. It's a racist, thing, but our reaction was. The brand person was-
So it's short from Matthew.
Yes.
But I got
See, that's another example.
At least when you know the one comes from Fox.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, we're into names. No, means,
They always tell me that.
So you're
There were.
They're related to
They're not-
the compound, but on the other side of the sheets.
Oh, yeah. Exactly.
They were. I had a good. I was.
Overeating. Learn how to say. That was ahead of the wire fountains. In fact, claims that. Anyway, I get fixed, temporarily fixed.
Are you?
All of us.
Yeah. How are you doing?
Not sure I'm going to.
People helped out. It's stopping the Trump trial on the way out. But I guess once
I was under gas.
on my way.
And
then I'm driving.
The last call was still around this morning.
Yeah, then I went to some.
Next call.
Yeah.
First came.
They have to run the house. That's well late. Oh, well, they got it fixed. Yesterday, so we did one on the bar, they were wrong, so I wanted to.
That away.
I know it was.
Oh, yeah. I know, I think that.
I don't think so. One still. I'm not sure. No.
These are the ones.
No, they didn't.
Returning. They wrote some national media and she saw that.
Carrie's last day of school.
Oh, yeah. We don't have that.
Oh, my.
Yeah.
About really fast.
Yeah.
So 7. Good evening, it's 7:00. I'm going to call the May 21st regular meeting of the Hayes Township Planning Commission to order. Would everyone please join me in the pledge of allegiance? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Good to see everybody here. Our new planning commission member has COVID. Oh, because of that has spared us the opportunity to enjoy that. So she was going to join us by Zoom, but in talking with her this afternoon, she's getting worse and was not able to focus even on a Zoom edition. So unfortunately, she doesn't get to enjoy this tonight, but she'll be back and with us next month, I'm sure. With that, we have the review and approval of the agenda. I'm going to ask that we amend the agenda to add an item dealing with further review of our shoreland landscaping plan and the property at 08045 Mulberry Lane. We have apparently last month through an administrative oversight. We weren't equipped with the survey. The survey was included in the application packet. In fact, the applicant went to great lengths to make sure all the required information was in the pack. It was in the application. Somehow that didn't all get translated into our packet. So we will go back around with the site plan review with the survey in front of us to answer any questions that may come up out of that.
So does that come before new business?
Yes, we'll do it as old business item 9A.
Okay.
With that, are there any other suggestions for the agenda? Hearing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve the agenda as amended.
Someone.
Motion, we have support. No support. The motion is support, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, we're good. Are there any conflicts of interest to declare?
I do 9A, I recuse myself
And
from the discussion.
good, thank you. Any others? Hearing none, let's go to the minutes, please. We'll start with April 16th.
Yeah, I was not present.
Okay,
That was an easy one.
other,
Yes, line 57. Delete my name as a yay because I had recused myself.
okay,
Line 62, delete my name as a yay, I had recused myself.
anything else in April? Hearing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve the minutes as amended.
And move.
Second.
Motion and support, all in favor? Any opposed? It's good, thank you. May 6th, the public hearing meeting.
There are no comments or corrections. I'd entertain a motion to approve the minutes as submitted.
I'll make that motion.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Thank you. Okay, up next is public comment. This is the 3-minute session.
Luann?
Hi, good evening. Two things to say, about this, property that was, the site plan review that you're adding to the agenda tonight. Just as a reminder that it wasn't just an administrative oversight, it really wasn't there in your packet. I pointed it out in my comments. I even objected from the audience. I even went up to the desk to see the site plan review and asked Marilyn Moorhead, where is it? And she said, I don't know, we don't have it. It wasn't an oversight. You just went ahead and did that approval without a site plan deliberately. And it was against the ordinance, it's against the state law, and now that I put that in writing in my comment that, yeah, it's against the state law, the site plan was supposed to be in there. You were supposed to be looking at it as you reviewed it. And it's not complete either, according to our zoning ordinance. I mean, it's a survey and everything, but it's supposed to include a list of the plants and all that, the survey, where the plants are. And I don't see that on that survey, so hope you'll deal with that. My other comment is about your plan, this very drafty draft for a site, I'm sorry, a supplemental use permit for Waterfront. It's the wrong tool. It's the wrong tool. We already have what's called a natural feature setback. In this book that I brought up many times to you, it's on the website by a host of organizations. It's called Protecting Michigan's Inland Lakes, a toolkit for local governments. Our ordinance is listed as one of the examples of a model natural feature setback ordinance. Why are you messing with it? You know, this is something that every property owner, whether who borders a waterfront of, you know, lake or stream, must do. It's not some special thing that they can choose to do, right? So that's what special use permits are for. You have a use of a tent for a wedding on your property and you want to use it for a week or whatever. That's a special use permit. Other types of special use permits are listed in our zoning ordinance, but that's not the tool to use for protection of our lakes and streams. Please, please use professional advice. I don't see you using it, and I think it's about time to start.
Next.
Okay. Doug Martin? Laura Ford?
I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you. I reviewed the 2019 master plan that was written under the direction of Ray Griffiths and Ron Bancy. And I'm wanting to know tonight if your actions with DeWitt Marine and with the changes to the shoreline protection are consistent with the master plan that requires open space in large scale projects, that enacts regulations to protect our groundwater and is for refinement of the waterfront protection measures. Your stated plan purpose number 5 is to promote the preservation of features that contribute to the township's character and to the area's economic base characterized by low density development, shorelines, woodlands, farmland, open space, and abundance of recreational amenities. So I'd like you to please explain to me how your agenda item of revising the shoreline preservation strip is consistent with the master plan. If you're calling for an amendment to the master plan, according to Michigan Township Association standards outlined in the Red Book, you must have a 42-day waiting period for comments to be addressed by any interested entities. Any amendments to the zoning ordinance require public hearings and posting of the hearing 15 days prior to that public hearing. So I'd like those questions addressed tonight, please. Thanks.
Bill Coughlin,
Thank you. I am Bill Conlon. As you probably know, I'm running for supervisor. And the reason of that is one of the major items in this election coming up is going to be, I'm going to be proposing that we stay with the 2009 zoning ordinance. I see no reason why it should be amended. Other than maybe you're serving entities other than the citizens. I don't own shoreline property. But I was in Grand Traverse County for 45 years. And I saw when you changed, or when townships changed the shoreline protections, the water quality deteriorated. Silver Lake is a prime example. I moved up here because East Bay Township, Garfield Township, and Elmwood Township caused higher densities. They were called bedroom communities of Traverse City. They didn't have long-term range planning to protect the rural character of especially Lanelaw County or Elmwood Township. That's why there's a traffic jam for an hour and a half between Cherry Bend Road and M72. Mr. Griffith, when you last on May 6th, when you talked to Wood Marine, you made a statement and said, we can ask them to do that for us. It's your job to put conditions that protect the citizens and the rural flavor of the community, not asking what the developer might do. It's what they will do. When this lady said we should have landscaping to protect the boats, the visual, maybe aesthetics, it was dismissed. You should have continued with your requirement in the conditions. And furthermore, approving 3 phases on an initial phase with no drawings, no specs, would have never been approved in any township I've ever lived. Good day.
Ellis Bull.
Okay.
All right, anybody on Zoom want to make comment? Please raise your hand. Got nobody.
All right, thank you. We'll close public comment at 7:12. And up next is the report of the Township Board representative of the Planning Commission.
The Board of Trustees met on May 13th, 2024 at 7 p.m. Brian Drury gave a presentation on why the Charlotte Public Library needs 0.8 mils in the August election. The board approved road millage resolution language corrections. The budget hearing was set for June 10, 2024 at 6 p.m. Derek Barnett resigned from the Planning Commission. Gary Cuddleback was appointed to the Planning Commission. Rainey's Landscaping will perform the mowing at the Undine Cemetery and fall cleanup. The next scheduled Board of Trustees meeting is scheduled for June 10th at 7 p.m. That's all.
Any questions for Matt? Hearing none, we'll move on to the ZBA rep. Rex?
Nothing to report.
Good. Up next, zoning administrator report. Ron?
Yes, I think you all have a copy of my report. Some of it you saw it earlier at the Board of Trustees meeting. I don't know if any questions.
Anyone have any questions for Ron?
Oh, looks like you've been busy.
All right, up next, thank you, Brian. Up next, we're going to move to full business. We're going to take up the site plan review of 08045 Pabashan. As we move into the site plan review, Okay, hold on.
Did I miss something?
Yeah, I'm sorry, wrong line.
No, not option, I'm sorry, Mulberry. I was reading the from Ron's report, options, like, sorry. So we're back to 08045 Mulberry. And as we did with the last session of site plan reviews relative to waterfront shoreline landscaping plans, the data required, which is really what we're looking at, is subject to planning commission ability to waive any or all of the below site plan requirements when it finds these requirements are not applicable to the proposed development. Since the property is 10 acres, the house is located more than 500 feet from the waterfront, which does not require a soil erosion permit. And that the proposed project meets all of the setback requirements and is a project reviewable by the zoning administrator for the structure. We are left dealing primarily with reviewing the waterfront. So in order to facilitate that, I'm going to suggest that the following requirements are not necessary for us to deal with the waterfront. As before, we have section 503.3, items G, H, I, K, M, N, O, P. Section 503.4, items B, D, E, and F. And section 503.5, item A, 4 through 11 inclusive, and item B. Those would all be appropriate items in a different type of site plan review for a different larger project, but for something that's specific to the waterfront, they pose unnecessary collection of data and reporting. So with that, I'd entertain a motion to eliminate those criteria from our review.
I make a motion to eliminate them.
If we have a motion, do we have support? Support. Thank you. We have motion and support. Do we have any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Right, and then the data requirements. Let us now take up what we need to do. So we have in front of you both a copy of the survey, as well as a larger version up here if there's something you can't read. The data as presented before from the intelligence subcommittee still holds true. Inventory of the materials are all native grasses. And as tip of the mint report indicates, it has a variety of softwood trees of various ages and some dead trees, stumps included are still there. Pictures of all of those are included in your packet. So going through 3A, 503.3A, name and address of the property owner, it's included in the survey and in the packet. The date, north arrow and scale and name of the individual and firm responsible for preparing said plan, that is there. The certified survey is here. The location of all existing structures or all proposed uses or structures on the site, including proposed drives, walkways, signs, exterior lighting, adequate parking for the proposed use. Show the dimensions of a typical parking stall and parking lot, loading and unloading areas if necessary, common use areas and recreational areas and facilities. Since this is a private residence, the majority of those which are applied to commercial projects are not necessary, although the parking facility and the driveway and associated other areas for parking are on the drawing. There were no existing structures on the property, and the structure proposed is so indicated on the drawing.
Can I ask a question
Yes, ma'am.
about the drawing? There is a diagonal place dotted line
Right,
that goes to a garage that appears to be on the adjacent property
that's
to
correct.
the north.
Yes. That is on the other property. I couldn't
Do
tell
we
you,
know what the,
I have no idea what that line is for. It doesn't have a distance indicated on it. It may have just been what they used as a survey marker, would be my.
It's called a traverse line there. It's called a traverse line for surveying.
Oh.
And shoot off of that line.
okay, all right, thank you.
The property owner is in attendance and looks to make a comment. Should we allow that?
I think answer the question.
Okay.
The dotted line is electrical service to that barn on the adjacent property which we used to own. The electrical, so it's the electrical line going down to the transformer next to that barn. It's covered by an easement with Great Lakes Energy, so it's all covered. It's not an issue, but that's what it is.
Great, thank you. With that, we go to item F, the location of existing environmental features such as water courses, wetlands, shorelines, man-made drains, mature specimen trees, wooded areas, or any other unusual environmental features. The location of the woodlands leading to the shoreline is contained in the photographs and start at approximately the contour line, the last green contour line on the drawing where the hill starts down is about where the woodlands start. Correct me if I'm wrong. And they continue consistently all the way down to the waterfront. And that's a distance of a couple hundred feet from there to the water. At the water, there is an area that may be wetlands. We don't know. The applicant has indicated at this time, he has no plans to do anything in the waterfront area. At some future point in time, they may consider a deck not to exceed 200 square feet and has indicated that he would pursue all relevant applications with DEQ, Eagle if needed, and any design features would be subject to that negotiation with them since 200 square feet is permissible under ordinance. It was a very complete application. I don't know why it didn't show up, so I apologize. With that, we now go to 5.03, item 4. Additional submittal procedures. And under that, we have 10 copies of the site plan were provided. The zoning administrator reviewed it and determined that all of the information was submitted. And once a complete application meeting requirements of the ordinance has been submitted, the zoning administrator asked us to take it. So item C, for all waterfront development requiring a shoreline landscaping plan, the shoreline protection subcommittee of the planning commission will review the landscaping plan in accordance with 3.14 to review by the planning commission. We did that as a report was submitted. This is a completely natural, undisturbed waterfront area. The depth of natural plantings far exceeds any portion of the zoning ordinance, and the report so indicates. 5.035A. The planning commission shall approve or approve with conditions an application for a site plan only upon the finding that the proposed site plan complies with all applicable provisions of this ordinance and the standards listed below, unless the planning commission waives a particular standard upon finding the standards not applicable, blah, blah, blah. The planning commission The planning commission's decision shall be in writing and shall include the findings of fact, which are the minutes based on evidence presented with each standards. That, I believe, takes us to approval of site plan. If approved by the planning commission, 3 copies of the plan should be signed and dated by both the applicant and the zoning administrator, or the planning commission chair. One signed and dated site plan shall be provided to the applicant, shall be obtained by the zoning administrator as part of the township record, and one should be made part of the planning commission. Conformity to the approved site plan required. Following approval of site plan by the planning commission, the applicant shall construct the site plan improvements in complete conformity with the approved site plan. Failure to do so shall be deemed a violation of this ordinance. We go on to 8, which talks about amending the site plan. At this point, there's been no action taken to amend a plan, and expiration of the site plan expires within 1 year of approval. Under conditional approvals, the planning commission may impose reasonable conditions with the approval of the site plan pursuant to section 903 of this ordinance. We could require a performance guarantee. We did not ask to do that, and this is not an as-built site plan. So, with that, I think the only condition that we talked about last time was, in fact, that should a deck be contemplated, that a determination of wetlands with DEQ be required. And the applicant had already indicated that that was his plan, and that they weren't planning a deck at this point in time, but sometime in the future they could. So with that, are there any questions on the survey document, site plan that was put forward? Any further discussion?
Where is the septic field located?
Well, at the moment, it isn't located anywhere, but we've got an approval from the health safe, what's it called?
Health department.
Health department, excuse my voice. And it's shown here, this square, and shows the approximate place. So, this was the topic line that you were asking about. Yes, that's an electrical line. Everybody is, this is the approximate. But it has to, we've done the soil perk tests and all that. So that's approximately where it goes.
Is the electrical easement a deeded easement?
Yes.
Thank you. Gives some peace of mind that,
It was, and it's in fact, because the box on which the electrical line comes is covered by an easement on lot 11 as well. So that's the thing you have to do with the underground lines.
thank you.
All right. Any other questions? Right.
Just one last point of clarification. Nothing's been done to this waterfront for decades, correct? I do travel through that neighborhood periodically. In my awareness in the last 30 years is that has not been changed. So it's all natural for the last 30 years.
We bought the property in 1995. That part of the property, we bought both parcels, adjacent parcels. This one that you're considering now, we have done nothing to the shoreline at all.
Thank you for providing that insight.
All right. Are we ready to make a motion? So I would entertain a motion as you see fit.
So we just moving to approve this, right? I move to approve the site plan on Mulberry I don't have the exact here.
Oh, 8045.
823. 8235. Mulberry Lane.
No,
No, it's 08045.
We deleted on the Wayne City Road, we deleted that meeting with
Yeah,
Eli,
I know.
because the meeting with Eli was really bad.
Okay. So we have a motion to approve the site plan and the shoreland landscape plan,
Yes,
which is do not. We have a motion. Do we have support?
I'll support.
Motion and support. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? All right. As before, we appreciate your work on the plan. Up next, new business. Incumbent upon the planning commission and its bylaws is the requirement that we submit a proposed budget to the board of trustees so that they can include it in their budget workshop and whatnot. Understanding all that we do not control our own budget, nor do we determine the final budget. This budget suggestion is exactly that. It's based on some assumptions we make on how many times we think we're gonna meet and other support items, supplies, and a plan for each of us to have some continuing education, publication and printing, and services which are defined as consulting services. This is in a format as it used in previous years and updated. I just put together some numbers, throwing in some inflation fact and an estimate of how many times we thought we'd need to meet. Does anyone have any comments or questions on the budget?
What was last year's budget and what was the final expense at the end of the year?
You know, we don't have the final expense at the end of the year because we haven't gotten there yet. And last year's budget was somewhere just under $40,000. With me. And again, this isn't our budget, this is our budget suggestion. These numbers get taken into the budgeting process by the township. I'm pretty sure they get broken out into a different format and included in different line items. So it's pretty hard to do that. And this is not a budget in the sense that people who run a business are used to doing a budget. This is really more of a sort of anticipated plan of work with some associated costs around it.
So is this a recommendation from us to the board?
Correct.
So it's our recommendation, but they ultimately make the decision.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
I wonder whether the line item of $2,000 for education is sufficient. Are we encouraging our members enough to get further education and qualifications to ensure that we are doing the right things when we are making decisions in the planning commission? And you know, I think you have to have some sort of ongoing education, and $2,000 doesn't sound like a lot of money to me.
That's correct. As you know, we're all asked to, or required to attend at least one continuing education program per year. Some of us go to more than that. Fortunately, by virtue of the township's membership in the MTA, which provides much of the continuing education, the cost per actual attendance is very small. Usually $100 or less per person. That being said, I have no problem in asking for more. Again, they will do what they can with the budget numbers to grant it. So I am open to suggestion of what you think that number should be.
well, that's probably a guess, but, I would think 3,000 would perhaps be more appropriate. But I would like to ask each of the members here, what they think about ongoing education, you know, and their commitment to that. I'm very committed to it, although, you know, for instance, I did an online course for ZBA, which took hours and hours and hours. I can tell you with Michigan State Extension Office. But I don't hear about what other education opportunities the other members are assuming or taking up.
So just briefly, the MTA, there are so many courses there. I try to take as many as I can, and you're right, that expense is basically covered, I think, through the other parts of the township. So I think that's an invaluable tool. We have a question, a concern, go online, you get feedback. It is invaluable. And yeah, the training that's there, if you haven't gone into the training sections, it's incredible.
You know, the advantage of the MTA stuff, when you go to one of their conferences, you're meeting with all of your peers, let's say, from around the state. And what is surprising to me is the commonality of issues that confront everybody. And typically, resources are brought in from various expertise bases that give people some idea of how to move forward. And importantly, the relationships that are established where you can ask for information. And the MTA is a wonderful resource that we have access to, and we get used as different topics come up. So, you know, I think I went to 3 sessions last year on a variety of topics, including the 1 3-day session we had up at Boyne. And, you know, it's important that we stay current, not only with the technical side of what trends are happening. And there are some surprising trends in zoning and planning going on right now. All right, so there was a suggestion we raise that to 3,000. Any other comments or suggestions?
I actually sit on the county planning board, and I try to do 1 a month, a webinar. And so the county ends up picking up that cost for me.
Okay.
What's telephone?
That's probably a carryover of the old days. I don't know, typically the zoning administrator and the assistant now have their own cell phones, but I think that was a carryover from when the township was using cell phones, and we could certainly strike it if we need to.
Well, I think it's part of the overall cost of our phones here at Township Hall too, so.
Okay.
Just a portion of it.
Anything else? With that, I'd entertain a motion to send these budget suggestions to the board for inclusion in their budget discussions.
I mean, just one last thing, bearing in mind the report we have from our auditor about the number of printing overruns that we had and associated costs to do with FOIA requests. I guess that the question would be, is $6,000 sufficient there?
So printing for us, as opposed to printing for the township, is a little hard to separate. For us, I think charges for printing would come back to notices for public hearings primarily, newspaper ads. To the extent we issue new documents, then there would be printing. The other kinds of printing is not a cost that's attributed to the planning commission. So I think given the way printing costs have escalated, the cost of newspapers going up, that number may be low, but I didn't have a real sense for how often we'd be dipping into that, so if there's a sense that we should increase that also, that's fine. I mean, they're gonna do whatever they can to balance the budget and meet the needs. So back to entertaining a motion to approve these suggestions.
I approve as, I approve, sorry, I make a motion to approve as amended.
Do we have support?
Support.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? No? Okay, we will send this off to the budget process. Let's see, board representative to us.
I'll give that to the board.
Thank you. All right, now up next is something that, we had talked about before that we never really followed up on. And that is talking about a zoning district in the new ordinance that is currently in our existing ordinance under neighborhood commercial district. It's been suggested that we consider changing the focus of this while still having a version of it to something called mixed-use residential, which puts the focus on residential, which is residential but allows certain commercial uses in it, small-scale commercial applications. You know, ideally, I think the model that people look at when they think about it is someone has a small store or a small professional service business and maybe an apartment above it. Something that blends the both residential and light commercial. Some of the nomenclature is just there to keep the focus on what's primary, and that's residential, but allowing some commercial uses. And part of the reason we need to have something like this is incompatible zoning occurs when you have residential zoning butting up against, directly up against commercial and or industrial areas. We have 3 spots in the township right now where commercial and industrial zoning occurs. We need to have the ability to, if a developer wants to come in and do anything with properties adjacent to them, we need to have the ability to address the concerns of incompatible zoning and have a blending of those zones. Not saying that this is a green light for developers to come in, but the reality is there is vacant property next to each one of those commercial industrial zones. And who knows what the future will bring. We should be prepared to address those concerns as they come forward. So what do you think, folks? Is this?
Okay, so I think that as commercial, a mixed residential commercial is very proper, and if you go throughout the state or other states, you see that everywhere just about. Industrial is something totally different. And that I would not support. And I think, you know, we ran into that problem with that, property, on the Orange City Road a few years ago, you know, which is like a spot zone.
Right, it is.
Well, it was grandfathered in, but
Right.
that's, so I think we want to get rid of as many of those as possible. But I think opening up areas that are next to commercial areas where you could have in a community, I mean, you know, you can foresee something, you know, where there's a service station and a restaurant and, you know, and an apartment building and that kind of thing. I would be for that.
Well, you already have a lot of this in Bay Shore. for example. You already have it, say Argonne, it's a restaurant, there's living quarters above it. I would think someone is probably going to build something like that around here in the future. So. You have to have it.
I enthusiastically concur. I think it's a great idea. I've made comments about it at previous planning commission meetings and saying that it was a big gap in the existing zoning ordinance, so we didn't have some sort of mixed use definition. I think you articulated the benefits very well as a buffer zone or a transition zone from sole residential to commercial. It's been very successful in other communities, and I personally witnessed that. Where completely redundant, what were perceived to be redundant and unusable areas were redeveloped into a very vibrant community, sub-community of a town or city. So yes, I think it's a great idea.
So the consensus seems to be that we should work on this and move forward to inserting it into the new plan. In order to do that, let's go through the existing ordinance and see if there's areas in there that we as a group think we would want to amend in any way. First off, we should not use the section number because we don't know how it's going to come out in the new one. And I propose that we consider the name change of the district to mixed use residential.
From neighborhood commercial.
From neighborhood commercial.
And delete neighborhood.
Yeah, all the way through.
Okay.
And the C1 nomenclature again will change to. So in the intent, I think we need to rewrite that to suggest that this is a local residential and business district that is more selective than a commercial district and provides for the establishment of small scale neighborhood and shopping areas, personal services, and the rest of that verbiage seems to me to be appropriate to what we're trying to achieve. But I do think we want to take out, or we want to put the emphasis on residential along with business in it.
Yeah.
Have any thoughts on that? No. So let's go through permitted uses. Have them strike you as inappropriate for this type of location.
I have one question, why are we, accept drive-through restaurants on?
I don't know, that's a legacy, it shows up in our existing commercial and industrial zoning. It's permitted as a special use permit. I suspect it was an attempt to limit McDonald's and other types of drive-through arrangements. I could be wrong, it was done before my tenure, but I suspect that's probably what the aim was at. But it is allowed as a special use permit, which means people will review whatever the plan was.
So it's not impossible.
I don't believe so. You make sure that it's in here. Yeah, I mean, that is the. Ministry, maybe it was just in the commercial.
No, I don't think it is.
It's probably just in the commercial, I'm sorry, I spoke incorrectly. We probably ought to have that in
The special use.
as a special use permit. It's a depot drive.
So I would include F as well.
Yes. I think you want to have a bank have a drive-through.
I do.
Here you go, here we go.
We have action.
No, mine ran out of,
That's fine.
thank you.
Yeah. So there's a couple in here that I'm not sure that I understand completely or am comfortable with. As we go under permitted uses, as I envision this area, perhaps a motel, but I'm not sure a resort fits into the areas that fit in our township where something like this might happen. And I'm also not sure about the co-location of antennas or similar sending receiving devices on the tower.
I don't know how it fits in. To me, it doesn't even belong there.
Well, no, this is, again, this was a commercial district in the old thing, and I don't see it fitting into this type of plan for a community arrangement.
How do public utility buildings fit within the public buildings and facilities?
So it's public utility buildings without a storage yard. So public utility building without a storage yard might be a station or a bill paying location. I don't know. I mean, I'm trying to think of how that would be. Might be a storefront from Great Lakes Energy or something. Would be one potential. The storage yard is the thing that people are trying to avoid. You don't want to have the big fenced area with all the trucks and the equipment and everything else. It might be an administrative center. Public buildings and facilities, this is a public building and facility, something like this could be there, a branch library, I mean, in larger cities, branch libraries and police substations and things like that often fit into some of these kind of communities. And I mean, I don't have a problem with the public buildings and facilities. The public utility buildings, you know, that might be something that we want to take into special use permits simply to be able to review what the plan is. What do you guys think? You're in the business, what do you think?
I think we probably should take the time to really understand what the specific words describe and how they might impact what we're doing. You know, we can hypothesize about what it means, but I think we should have a little more thought on what we've got in front of us.
I'm good with that. I will say this. This has been in the ordinance for a long time. It's never been used. There is a neighborhood commercial district in our township. I'm not sure that whatever idea these were conceived around has ever really been born into fruition. So we have the ability to define them, you know, in a way we think consistent with what the vision for this area should be. And I'm fine with taking more time to do that. I mean, this was, you know, this is really playing a little catch up. And if we needed to postpone it for a little while more while we work through it, I'm okay with that. It's one of those things that we don't want to let fall by the wayside.
Well, if I could, second, there's two that bother me in the permitted uses, and that's line item D, restaurants, bars, and L, which is hotels and resorts, and it's only primarily because of the hours, those types of facilities. If you're really pushing for residential, that's probably, they may have to go to special use permit for proper buffering and those types of things.
So is it the restaurant that is a problem or is it the bar?
I think it's more the bar.
I would agree with that 100%.
More the bar.
Okay,
They're just together in the same line.
yeah. Anyone else have thoughts on it?
So you would put that under special use permit? Yeah, I think so.
I think that Mark makes a good point, that perhaps we're putting the cart before the horse. I mean, this is a good discussion, but I think we need to come back to it when we've got the words that describe the intent, so that we really understand what we're trying to achieve.
Okay.
If you don't know where you're going, any road will do, so to speak.
Well, I understand, and I think I heard everybody describe what they thought this area was. And that description would provide, I think, the intent as we see it. But I am completely happy with saying we can take this up next month with the proviso that people work on it and bring forth suggestions on what they think the intent should be and some of these defining characteristics. With that, let's table this issue and move on. Okay.
Okay.
All right, now we're coming up to the main event. Waterfront. This has been one of the most contentious issues in the township for the last few years. And before we dive into it, we're going to go through the draft of the comments and then some of the other suggestions. But I think we need to have some kind of conceptual framework of what we're looking at. And to that end, I'm going to ask each of you to share what you think we want to achieve by doing this. What do we desire when we come out of this? So rather than call on somebody, is there anybody that would like to go first?
Sure, go first.
Okay,
I think you have to make some changes to the waterfront area. You have to take what we've learned from all these lawsuits and all this stuff going on for the last, I don't know how many years. And you have to incorporate so it doesn't happen again. You have to make sure that we all understand what simple things like structures are, or simple things like, you know, who can dredge, who can't, everything else. I think it needs to be clarified. So leaving it as it is, I don't think is an option. I think.
it's just to go down the road.
Yeah, in looking through this again, you know, there's a lot of what I would say is conflicting content between what's in this, what's in previous versions, and what's being done or permitted or allowed through other government agencies that probably have more expertise than we do. So as we move through the process, I'd just like to take that into consideration.
We'll start sharing the mic because yours is not working. Matt, you want to go next?
Sure. I wish we could all agree on what's right at the lake. We won't. There's many different opinions on what's right. The state recommends a 5-foot no mow zone. Tip of the mitt came and they doubled their recommendation in one meeting. What I'd really like to see is a countywide, so that all townships are the same. I think that's where this should come from. That's my thoughts.
Okay. Rex?
I think the big challenge is not only the way in which the zoning ordinance is written, but the way in which those that implement decisions and enforce it interpret it. I think that we have an obligation to create a zoning ordinance that's not only clear to the public, but it's also clear to the zoning administrator and his staff, or her staff, wasn't wrong, to make sure that they know what can be approved or cannot be approved. and also, I guess, the planning commission and the shoreline protection strip subcommittee. As we do a zoning ordinance, we try to create rules that so that, and the ideal scenario is that you have a go, no-go line. You say, okay, if it's here, it conforms, but if it's there, it doesn't. How do you then interpret those type of rules when we have so many different types of properties, shoreline properties, and where it might make a sense for such and such a thing to happen or be excluded on one property, whereas right next door, it doesn't apply. I think that, so I guess what I'm saying is the issue of discretion for either the zoning administrator or the shoreline protection strip subcommittee or the planning commission is the issue that is core to our disagreement. Now, having said all that, we all have to accept that we have different viewpoints, and we have to find a way to get to some sort of consensus. But as we do that, and some of us might disagree with something and give it up, and others may do the same. When the end product has to be something that's better than what we have today. And we need to understand what it is that is needed in order to make that happen. So after Marilyn's had her say, and you've had your say, I'd like Ron to also have his say, to tell us what he needs. Sorry, that was so long.
Okay, I'll try to be succinct. I worked with the waterfront and tried to get changes on the shoreline for the many people who are not in compliance. Some are grandfathered in, or that's what they claim. And it's been incredibly difficult. So I think we need to think about three things. Protection of the lake, because the only way you can protect Lake Charlevoix or any body of water is to make sure that that area of land that's adjacent to the water, that is in this case above the ordinary high water mark, landward of that, is free from pollution and is designed to stop any pollution from runoff. So all of the things that we try to design have to do with that. And we can try to legislate every little detail, but I don't think we're going to get very far by doing that. I think the problem is in implementation. And you need to be able, which is why I argued for the subcommittee years ago, I think 2015, somewhere around in there, because I wanted to be able to go with some kind of backup from the township and say, talk to the individual landowners. You know, if there was an opening, and so with Ron's design, we had the provision for doing that. And that's why that's important. So that allows us to go and say, you want to do X with your property, then you have to change your shoreline protection strip because you are not protecting the lake. You don't have to say it that way, but you have to suggest the changes that are required in order to do that. And, you know, I'm willing to die on that sword. If we don't protect the lake, we'll lose everything. And so it has to be clear and understandable to the entire township that when you buy property on the lake, you have this responsibility. And so that's why I try to design originally, which might have gotten lost in all of this other things. A way that, a framework where we could try to use to apply to all the different types of shoreline. Here.
Okay, thank you. So I have a few points. First, I think we need to come to a recognition that individual properties have unique characteristics and unique needs. One size doesn't fit all. That just because someone else does one thing doesn't mean it's necessarily wrong or right for the next property. So I think we need to be able to individually look at properties. I think the goal for this is to increase compliance, because we've had this ordinance for a very long time, and our compliance with it is not great. Let's just be blunt, it's not. You can drive by on the lake and you can see people just aren't complying. Whether they said they would, or they wouldn't, or they don't, or they just say we're not gonna do anything, and then 2 years later, they forget that promise and change happens. I think we need to work towards simplicity and clarity and relieving an undue burden on property owners for trying to ferret their way through this very complex ordinance. I think a simple, clear plan is important. And with that, I think one of the advantages we've had in the subcommittee is the requirement that we have outside expertise that no one in the township has as part of the process. And truly, the people that have been most compliant in developing these plans are ones that work with landscapers and landscape engineers and designers who really help them create projects that go a long way towards meeting the intent and in large part the letter of the ordinance in a way that they can live with. And I think we need to think about, we have 3 different lakes in the township. Each one of those has different needs for protection. The wave action and the shoreline destruction on Susan Lake is radically different from Lake Charlevoix, and that's different from Lake Michigan. And what might be required to protect the shoreline in Lake Michigan might be different. Runoff into Lake Charlevoix and Lake Susan Lake is probably more of an issue. And I think we need to have the ability to look at those lakes for what they need as opposed to, again, one size fits all. And I think we need to recognize that there are agencies, both at the state and national level, that have more expertise than we do. And we need to incorporate that into our evaluation. So at the end of the process, I hope we've accomplished those things. Ron?
Well, you know, when I came on board as zoning administrator, you know, one of the first things that I was handed was a stack of zoning files that was about 2 feet high. And said, well, these are all violations we've identified and we'd like them pursued. And the very first one on top was from 1996. And so that's the first one that I took to court, and we won. And then the owner didn't comply, and then he had to go to court 3 times to get it taken care of. I look at some of the projects that have been done under the old ordinance, and you know, I see a marina, a complete marina that went in under the old ordinance. Because I don't know all the reasons for it. I know it ended up in court. We have somebody that created their own island and had a house and a boathouse right on the water. And that was because that was the old ordinance, and that was left to the discretion of the zoning administrator. And I had, you know, I came to the township with the idea that we probably need to work with the property owners more. We needed a method to do that. I think one of my first contacts with Marilyn when we talked about it. And I can't even name or count the number of sites that Roy, Marilyn, and I have been on since we implemented that plan. And the amount of compliance that we've had with that, with the cooperation of property owners. Roy said it, not all properties are the same. They're one of the key things that brought me to make that decision to bring it to the township was a call from a contractor. And he came right into the office after he called me, because the property owner wanted to make improvements to the shoreline. And I said, and he brought in a plan and it showed that they were gonna put in a 15-foot green belt on the property. And I said, the ordinance requires 50 feet. He said, the property owners can't afford 50 feet. And they won't do anything if they have to put in a 50-foot. And he took me out to the site. He took me out to the site to take a look at it. And he asked me, do you think the 15 feet would be better than nothing? That whole shoreline was nothing but putting green. And that's when I decided to come to the board and say, we need a little discretion. If somebody wants to make an improvement to the shoreline, I think we have to allow this rather than turn them away. And so we started this process, and I think we've done a great job. We see the improvement on the lake. It's supposed to be a gradual improvement that people make improvements to their property, and it's worked. It's worked. I mean, just look at our log for this month. I mean, we've been out on a lot of sites. We have more coming. We have other applications coming in that I know of that are on the lakes too. And we're getting compliance. And even Rex's neighbor who went in and did almost a clear cut on his property. He was in here into our township meeting with us this past week. And he's meeting with Tip of the Mitt to get a plan together, and he will comply. Okay, so I mean, I think it's very necessary to have a little bit of give here and there if we want a gradual improvement of the shoreline.
Okay, so let's talk about what we have in front of us. So first, we're gonna go through this draft and see the issues. Having spent some time around the issue, that ability to look at individual properties individually, having spent some time with our township attorney on how can we do that? Is there a way that the planning commission can look at individual properties individually? And there's only one way that isn't a mess. You could try and write an ordinance that offered a variety of options, which would be so broad that it would be unenforceable pretty much. Or the mechanism that is available to planning commissions to look at individual projects is the special use permit. So that's really the only option you have. So once we get through what's in the ordinance, we need to think about how would that be applied under a special use permit process. And if there's a special use permit, as you've seen from the site plan review process, which is required as part of the special use permit, the standard site plan review is not focused on the shoreland landscaping plan, which is really what we're after with this. That's not to eliminate a site plan review from a larger project that would require a special use permit for other reasons. But for the waterfront, in order to look at somebody's individual property, we need to be able to take it inside that to do it effectively. So we would then need to create a category under site plan reviews, specific to waterfront reviews. And then we would, from the ordinance, pull criteria to develop supplemental site development standards, which are used in that site plan review. And they all have to tie together to make this work. So we go to start with what's in the ordinance. And let's just begin at the beginning. We have two new people that didn't have a chance to get nice little pink boxes on the side with their initials on it, so we're gonna ask people for comments tonight as we go through this. So let's start with the intent. First comment in the intent was from Rex. You asked, why did we delete community, scenic, and recreational values? I think part of the reason was there's no good definition for those or no standard for those. So trying to eliminate clear, or trying to create clearer definitions, I think was the reason.
Well, if you're gonna do that, there's no definition of quality of life either, but, you know, so I just thought that those were, I'm not gonna fall on my sword over it, but I think that, in particular, recreational values is somehow missing from this intent now, and I think that is a loss.
I can live with that. Anybody else have an issue with putting recreational in?
No.
Yeah.
I got this one. So in 4.1, the last sentence says, thus owners of waterfront lots in the township and the township have an added responsibility regarding the preservation and protection of these natural resources and water quality. In looking at that just in black and white, I'm curious why all township residents don't carry the burden of protecting the waterways. And in a couple of instances, there are businesses or property uses that, for all intents and purposes, could cause contamination. But as things are written and responsibilities assigned, the filtration process is put on the waterfront owners rather than those property owners that are causing potential contamination. And that doesn't seem right.
Somebody want to comment?
I don't know how to respond to that. I mean,
I'll try and respond. It says added responsibility. So it, in my mind, it implies that every member of our township has a responsibility, but the owners of waterfront lots and the township have an added responsibility. So to me, I think the wording's okay, but
I think we should make it clear that protecting water quality is everyone's responsibility. In addition, if you have a waterfront lot, for better or worse, you're the last line of defense. But you shouldn't be the only line of defense. And I think you made a very valid point that we should be looking not just at waterfront, but at all sources of pollution. Where you run into issues with this, as we've learned over time, is oftentimes significant sources of water pollution come from farming activities and leisure activities. Farmers have to apply fertilizer and pesticides and all those kinds of things that we need to have the food that we eat. But that also leaches into the environment. And if there are waterways nearby, they tend to flow to lakes, and you know, that's one of the sources of pollution into the water bodies. I think leisure activities, and I'm not going to pick on any particular golf course, but golf courses, of which there are many around here, use a lot of fertilizer and a lot of pesticides and do a lot of mowing, and they have a lot of water that they spray. And where does that water go? So I think it needs to be a statement of intent within the township that protecting the water is everyone's responsibility, and that waterfront people, because they have the waterfront and the ability to do some things to protect it, should consider doing a little more.
so why not just add a sentence in intent to say, while protecting water is everyone's responsibility in the township, or residents have an added, sort of.
You mean water for residents? You mean water for residents?
Right, that's what I mean.
I guess where respectfully, I would like to continue the conversation is, you know, in general, we have property owners that use their property in ways that all in all cause contamination. A financial burden should not be placed upon waterfront owners. An additional expectation or burden shouldn't be put on waterfront property owners to be the final filtration for those property owners' land use. In some capacity, if we're trying to be equitable, you know, the benefit of property ownership in general, what people do with their property should be directly, or the responsibility should be directly placed on those property owners. And even though it's not in Hayes Township, what I would say is an example of contamination is Bay Harbor area, where through the use and ultimately by covering up the old cement plant and then put a golf course on top of it, which they water every day in the summer, causes a problem. And because of that, they then had to create their own system to filter the water prior to entering the bay. And so that property owner took direct responsibility for their environmental impact. I think that in some form probably needs to be considered as we move forward with this. Maybe not specifically in intent, but in some capacity, again, trying to be equal and fair to all property owners in Hayes Township. I think we need to have that continued conversation.
Okay, I happen to agree with that. I think it's everyone's responsibility, and I don't know what the mechanism we have or if we need to create a mechanism for looking at other uses that create pollution. That's going to be outside the realm of this particular focus of the ordinance. But I think it's a point that we as a community need to come to some grips with. With that, let's move to item number 2, setback area regulations. My first comment is, should we reference the 2 overlay districts? I think that kind of goes without saying because they have their own specific setbacks in them. Ron, did you had not an accessory structure note?
I'm sorry,
So we're on 4.2 setbacks. You noted that it says not accessory structure.
a long time ago.
Yeah. So it deals with the no structures with the exception of the patio deck, walkway and everything. We allow accessory structures, small sheds, was it less than 120 square feet or 200 square feet to go without a permit? Are you specifically calling them out in this or suggesting that they're exempt from this?
I honestly can't remember why I put it there. I can't, to be perfectly honest.
Well, that's fine. Let's just leave that there, and if you come back to that,
It's all in caps too.
yeah, it was,
It relates specifically to the word exception.
right?
Right.
So if it comes back to you, we can circle back around to
All right.
Rex, you're next.
Yeah, I said, it says here, no structures, etc., shall be allowed within 80 feet of the ordinary high water mark on Lake Michigan, Lake Charlevoix, and on Susan Lake. point I made was that in the existing zoning ordinance, it's 100 feet on Lake Michigan and Lake Charlevoix, and 80 feet on Susan Lake. So this proposal winds back the setback upon the Lake Michigan and Lake Charlevoix shoreland properties. I just wondered why it was weakened, and to me, it doesn't, to go to your point, not all things are the same, and I think the Susan Lake is quite different from Lake Michigan and Lake Charlevoix. So I'm puzzled why the weakening, and quite candidly, I don't agree to it.
I agree with Rex.
As I recall the discussion around that, it was to standardize the setbacks on the waterfront. I don't particularly have any strong feelings one way or the other on it. 100 feet works, 100 feet works on Lake Charlevoix and Lake Michigan. You guys have any thoughts?
The only thing that comes to mind is the lots on Eagle's Nest in Forest Cove. The depth of those, could you still have a decent building envelope if you went to 100 feet?
I'm not suggesting that Susan Lake goes to 100 feet. Susan Lake is at the moment 80 feet,
No, I don't think.
and Lake Charlevoix and Lake Michigan are 100 feet. So I'm saying that keep Lake Charlevoix and Lake Michigan at 100, keep Susan Lake at 80.
Okay, I misunderstood. Thank you.
That's okay.
So I know we're talking about the lakefront and everything else, but in our ordinance, it says streams as well.
Right.
So someone's got to enforce that a stream running through a golf course or a stream running through a farmer's field is gonna be 100 foot on either side.
Well, thank you for bringing it up. That was
I
on-
don't know how to address that.
Well, I'm gonna suggest something. Having read through it, we mentioned streams in just a couple of places. And the entire rest of the ordinance is focused around lakefront properties. Ordinary high water mark is a measure, setbacks is a measure, all of those kinds of things don't apply to streams. And as far as I can tell in looking through the records, we've never had a shoreline landscaping plan or a permit done around a stream traversing a property. And this, to me, seems to be part of an ordinance that is written with no ability to enforce or any ability to really monitor. Because we not only have full year-round streams, we have seasonal streams and occasional water courses, and theoretically, all of those are encompassed. I don't know that it's appropriate to, in this area, it might be a topic for its own separate section. I don't think you can commingle looking at how you do a lakefront with how you look at a stream. I think they have different properties and different needs. And we probably need to treat them separately.
I think the Corps and Eagle have rules and guidelines as far as improvements go and what you can and cannot do. And while it's not necessarily the shoreline protection strip required, I think their current rules and guidelines are fairly strict. That figures in with the conversation.
Well, I think they would need to be included in whatever we do. I mean, the point I'm making is what you need to do for a stream wandering through a farmer's field is different than what you need to do for someone that's building a new house on Lake Michigan. So they have different issues, but they both impact lake quality. And, but I think we need to create some separation within the ordinance for those two issues and address them separately. What do you guys think?
Would that mean a stream going through a farmer's field, you would have 400 feet or
or no, he'd have 200 feet of property he couldn't use.
Well, that would be one interpretation of the way this ordinance is written, which is why we're going through this exercise, because the way it's written allows for too many questions like that to come up with. And quite honestly, someone who plants corn around or up to a stream running through their field, half the time you can't see it. You don't know what's there. And, you know, we haven't even begun to test the waters on enforcement, because that's not really our role, but it's an issue. Where do you measure the distance from, right? The distance is pegged off the ordinary high water mark. Stream doesn't have an ordinary high water.
Yes, they do.
They do.
They have an elevation. But where in the stream does that occur?
I believe Eagle defines it as the place, the highest eroded spot.
On
Where
which
they
side?
the grass, both sides.
So then you go, okay, it's 100 feet to both sides.
Right.
Back to your question.
Yeah.
Is that really what we're after?
I don't remember the context, but I was working with Ron and we designated the two main streams that we saw running through Hayes Township. Do you remember that, Ron?
I do, we have the map in
Right.
my office.
And I think that there should be some definition of what you mean by a stream. I mean, if it's a significant waterway and what's meant by a significant waterway, but if it's of a certain size, then we have to give some consideration to protecting the land on either side of it. And if it's something that's seasonal, which a lot of these streams are, you know, June and July, maybe, May, you know, April, I mean, as climate changes, but as the water runs out, but they're not there in October, then I don't think that we can, legislate's not the word, but I don't think we can include those as streams that need to be protected. So.
I think something else we need to take into consideration that's gonna create a greater gray area is streams change location constantly. And so trying to enforce a relative point of reference for, you know, anything we're talking about here, it's gonna be a moving target.
Well, why couldn't you go from the midpoint of the stream and be protected so many feet on either side?
Because the midpoint of the stream may move over 10 years.
So it moves, so then the protection moves.
So then the landowner has a cost imposition to move whatever protection strip we're talking about.
I think this is a case for where looking at the individual stream property in question would be important to be able to work with landowners on that. I think, I mean, everybody's right in this discussion. What we need to do is find, so first of all, let's take up the concept of creating a separate category for streams so that we can deal with them separate from the issues that, and the descriptions that we've got for what we deal with in, which is based primarily around lakes. I think we need to come up with something similar for streams. I think we need to involve the Eagle recommendations and in some ways defer to them, and then talk about how do we apply them locally. One of the issues that we had when we first took this up, we had two people on the planning commission that were engaged in farm activities. And they started talking immediately about the loss of income as the loss of tillable property or plantable property. which they then liken to an unlawful taking. The lawyer, get into that argument with them, but it was enough of a concern that we can't just blindly go ahead without considering some of those issues. So, that's why I'm arguing, I guess, in some ways, that we need to treat streams separately from lakes, but with the same intent of trying to protect the
I agree
waters.
with you.
I agree that we should do a separate category for streams, but and also the advantage would be that we could revisit streams after we've gone through what I consider to be the far more important area of waterfront regulations on the lakes. Here we are, we've been on this now for 35 minutes, and we've got about 8 lines down the first page. And so I would shelve, I have to be careful in America because tabling and shelving, and it's different from British English. So, yeah, we should shelve it and come back to it once we've done the lakefront stuff.
So going forward, as we look at this, let's agree that we're going to read this without streams in it, with the understanding that we'll come back around and address streams separately.
Right, agreed.
You can tell them in the clarity now,
Okay.
trying to define this stuff. Why have something in there that you're not gonna enforce,
Right,
or put a
no, I
hard?
agree.
Yeah,
And
that's.
I disagree, Rex, I think you can have 10 times more pollution through a stream from anything upstream from those things than you can from a waterfront lot. So I think it's amazingly important.
I didn't say that.
No, sorry.
What I said was that we've got all these pages and pages of waterfront regulation that we need to get through. And what we do is talk about streams for 20 minutes, important though it may be. I think we're trying to put the cart before the horse, that's what I'm trying to say.
Okay.
Say, Roy, I thought of mine up here, before I did that, whenever you're ready.
I'm ready right now.
Ready right now. We went through along the shoreline of Lake Charlevoix, took pictures of every shoreline property in 2009. And then we did it again in 2015. That was actually on my boat. That we went and took all the pictures in 2015. And we were just amazed at the number of decks that had been converted into gazebos and pergolas and attached a pump house to it. So I think that's what I would refer that it just needs to stay as a deck and just have to emphasize that it can't be built, as an accessory building of some kind.
You're going back into this.
I'm way back on 4.2.
So, our ordinance has been pretty clear that you can have one deck not to exceed 200 square feet. Made with permeable or water drainage material, typically deck boards with a space between them. I don't think that can be stretched enough to say you can turn that into a dressing table.
Right. I don't think so.
And I think that's exactly what you're suggesting, making clear, is that that's the limit.
Right.
All right. I think we've come to some agreement on the 100 versus 80. Rex got into the whole issue of the ordinary high water mark.
And it is important
It is,
because it was the subject of extensive review at the ZBA on whether the ordinary high water mark moves when changes are made to the shoreline protection strip. The ZBA voted in majority that it did not. I was the dissenting vote. I think we need to decide this at the planning commission. The ZBA can only rule on what it has in front of it. So I was asked by the ZBA to bring back this important issue to the planning commission to get consensus here on what we really wanted to mean.
and more to the point, the ZBA can only rule on specific properties. It can't in fact create ordinance.
Yes,
So that decision was applicable only to one particular property. That doesn't change the import of what you're suggesting. And this is where I think, my opinion, is that we need to defer to, on Lake Michigan and Lake Charlevoix, those higher order agencies that have staffs whose job it is to manage that. When you talk to the people at Army Corps, they have told me in direct terms that they control the boundaries of the lake. And if they say the boundary of the lake, the ordinary high water mark moves, if an excavation was done, I'm not gonna argue that. That's their role, that's their job, and that's their span of control. In which case, in the case you talk about, if we adopted that standard, it would be clear that if a boat basin were created, the ordinary high water mark would move. What do you guys think?
Well, two things, you got two issues here. One is defining what the ordinary high water mark is, 581.5. Which you can measure with your phone on the shoreline, you can tell what it is right now. It's a number, definable number. The part of it moving, that's a whole nother issue. My question is like, how did we get, if it moves, if somebody's gonna build a, whatever you call it, marina, whatever, how do you all get to, or probably weren't on that at the time, but how do we get to where we said, yep, this is okay, and you can cut through the shoreline protection strip and everything moves? So that's the clarifying part that I can clarify a number, and you can meet a number. That's easy.
Right, I mean, my understanding was the reason why we use the ordinary high water mark and not the all-time high water mark is because the all-time high water mark can change.
So
The ordinary high water mark is sort of the average, isn't it, of where the lake usually normally is, and that may be sort of gradually changing over time, but it doesn't change from season to season.
So the ordinary high water mark is established through a process that involves international Great Lake datum and a bunch of other things. And it may be periodically updated, and it's issued by, I believe, the Army Corps and some collaboration between Canada and the United States. There's a lot behind it. We use the ordinary high water mark because it's a fixed point from which we measure setbacks and other requirements. We cannot use a variable measure. We have to use a fixed point for that process. All-time high water mark does fluctuate. Honestly, probably ordinary high water mark moves, but until the new data comes out with the new standard, we're stuck with what the current law is. Not only does the Army Corps say what it is, the state of Michigan in one of its statutes identifies what the ordinary high water mark is. And interestingly, they're two different numbers, which doesn't help clarity at all. Going back to the point we're talking about is, if the Army Corps actually controls the boundaries of the lake, and they say, this is what the boundary is today, and this is what we're permitting being done, and that's the boundary tomorrow, then all of our ordinance should flow off whatever that boundary is. So if they move the boundary, then the shoreline protection strip needs to move also to be consistent with whatever the new shoreline is. That, I can't see any other way around that.
Okay, so just to be clear, core is the overlying final decision on a lot of these issues. Is that what we're saying?
On Lake Michigan and Lake Charlotte. Susan Lake, the decision maker, I believe, is Eagle.
And there's a lot of things that they.
It's not part of the international waterway,
Right.
but Lake Charlevoix is.
Right. There's a lot of things that the Corps does and gives permits for that we're not gonna agree, that people don't wanna agree to.
No question. I don't know how you argue with them.
I'm not saying you should, I mean, they are the Corps of Engineers, if they say you can do something. You're gonna, this is gonna come up quite a bit coming up here.
I know, and it's a thorny issue, and there's no real good answer to that. The only thing I go back to is, we don't have a room full of scientists, we don't have a room full of biologists and botanists who spend their life studying this issue. Theoretically, the Army Corps does.
So Corps says I can build a harbor, this township can't stop them.
I don't know that we should, I don't know that. What I am saying is that the Army Corps has to make a decision in coming to a decision as to whether or not you can build a harbor. They have to look at what the alternatives are. And they tell me, they have told me in the past, that they are going to choose that which they determine is least harmful to the lake. And they issue a statement of whether or not there's an adverse impact from the project. So again, if they bring in the weight of their expertise and tell me that this is the least harmful alternative to the lake.
Okay.
What am I gonna say? That you can't have that, but you can have this, but what you can have is more harmful?
I'm not suggesting we argue with Corps of Engineers, I think they are the experts, so. I think this is gonna come up in other issues.
It will, and until we can affirm that standard, we're gonna have this discussion.
Okay.
I'd like to rephrase the discussion if I may.
Sure.
I regard some entity like the Army Corps of Engineers, they're experts. But they're also experts with whom we can disagree in our particular circumstances. Just like a lawyer, a lawyer can give you advice and counsel. It doesn't mean that you have to go by everything they say and do, as long as you're not breaking the law. The same with the Army Corps of Engineers. There may be circumstances where we might fundamentally disagree with their opinion. And as long as, we weren't transgressing the law or their regulations, we could go against them. The important thing about the ordinary high water mark, it's such a dumb thing to define. Let me just explain. The ordinary high water mark is an elevation. It doesn't say the elevation of the, you take a notional watermark and say this is the land where that ordinary high watermark lies. So suddenly you go from an elevation to a latitude, longitude. You're going to decide feet and inches horizontally. Okay, but it doesn't say the ordinary high watermark, although it was defined in 1987 or whatever. It doesn't say this is the point at which in 1987 the ordinary high watermark, this is the limit of the lake. It just says it's the elevation. So what I'm asking, because this was a very long and detailed discussion of the ZPA with the various petitioners. If for whatever reason, either naturally or because somebody does something, the ordinary high water, the lake moves from perhaps what it was yesterday to something where it is now. Has the ordinary high water mark changed? Because nobody says it was the elevation where the water touched the landing on February the 1st at midnight in 1987. It says it's at this elevation. Well, I'm an engineer. In my view, you've got a lake, you change the shoreline, the ordinary high water mark's got to move. I mean, that to me, it's
Then you don't call it an ordinary high water mark. The whole idea of calling it that was that you were taking an average or a median.
Yeah, but it's just a height.
I get it, I get it. I live on the lake, so I know how it changes and how it doesn't change. That is, it's usually within a certain area. Now, recently, there've been some drastic changes. But for years and years and years, it barely changed at all.
So, Rex,
So-
I think the answer to it, as I see it, is that should the lake is like this, and the Army Corps says the lake can be like that, the water is gonna flow to follow the lake line, and they're gonna take an elevation. That becomes the ordinary high water mark at that new location, and that's the spot that we start zoning from. I have no other way that I can think of. And if somebody can find one that makes it reasonable from a zoning perspective, to be able to find a fixed point to start your feet and inches measurement. I don't know what it is.
But the question, see, you're all going, well, this is a circuitous.
It is.
We're going around in circles here. The question I asked was, if the shoreline changes, does the place of the ordinary high water mark move with that change?
I think I just said to you, yes, it does.
Okay,
And I say this to this.
yeah, but I didn't know whether you're going this to this or that to that.
Okay.
So. No, I mean, we can get lost in.
Yes.
In this discussion, but it's then, look. It was a point of major contention.
Yes, it was.
And all I'm trying to do is bring it to the planning commission to say, we need to address it in our zoning ordinance.
And I think we have by establishing it as the ordinary high water mark is defined by US Army Corps or the state of Michigan, whichever reference we want to use at 581.5.
So
And that's all we can do. So if the shoreline, if the Army Corps says the shoreline can move, 581 is the new spot, wherever that is, and that's where we start our measurement. Does that make sense?
then we need to put it in our zoning.
Absolutely.
So Rex, what you're really asking, if you build this harbor and the water line moves into the harbor, the shoreline protection strip starts at the end of that harbor and moves back.
Yeah, it starts.
Sorry, let's just put it on the table where you're asking.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Got it, thank you.
I think
I mean-
that's the only fair way to go.
Yeah, so, but it needs to be defined because the ZBA ruled against that. It said, no, the shoreline, the ordinary high water mark remains where it was before that channel was excavated.
The history around that was somebody made the decision in one of the cases. Remember whether it was it Oyster Bay or DeVos's? I guess it was DeVos's, and they had a legal opinion from the township attorney at that time that they based it on that said it didn't move. And that's why they granted it. You're right, we're changing the ordinance. I think we need to change it to reflect that, 581.5 is the number, and that's wherever that is, that's where we start from.
Wouldn't, if the elevation changes where the waterway went, wouldn't that make a difference?
I'm not following you.
Okay, so you have the hypothetical above that, and you open up the waterway, and you're saying, where does the shoreline protection go?
No, it goes around.
It goes around, but suppose the land is sloping up.
Still would then be whatever gradient it is and however wide it needs to be, but it would
So
start at the
it's
50
not the
foot.
ordinary high water mark.
It is.
If you go by a certain elevation.
Well, no, when you build that basin, the ordinary high water.
Oh, the
moves
water
in-
would be, right, where the water is,
Moves in with the water.
Yeah.
And that's where you start then to measure for your shoreline protection strip.
but not the land.
Whatever, however we do it the same.
Right, the water will stay the same, you're right. So I'm talking about the land. That's, so the slope will be.
Right.
Okay. I got it.
Now, having said all that, when we go through this, there's a whole new thing then about whether or not you could do a channel.
Right,
Okay, because that was the other point of contention at the ZBA.
I understand.
2022. So I just wanted everybody not to forget that.
So we need to have language. On your high water mark. 581.5 is the standard.
Just in here, 581.2.
Okay, 581.2 is the standard. And I don't know that we need to say anything beyond that, because 581.2 is if the shoreline moves, 581.2 moves with it.
Right.
But we can be more explicit if you, and I'm open to language on that. Okay?
Yeah.
Got it. Huh, what's going on? Matt, comment, bad, what about steep slope? You're in the shoreline protection strip.
Right, my thoughts were, anybody with a steep slope can have no deck.
Really?
Well, if it drops over 2 feet. That eliminates, you can't have any deck over 2 feet of natural grade.
It's an interesting question.
But I can tell you why.
Where do you measure that 2 feet drop from? Is it like, so in a house that's built on the hillside, when we measure the distance to the roof line, which is a limit we have in the zoning ordinance currently, there's a whole formula for measuring through the different locations on the house to get to the peak. Do we use that same standard for decks? Or do we measure 2 feet from where it starts on the hillside? So that you come, where it butts into the slope?
Maybe 5 feet at the other end.
It might be. So the question is, somebody that's got a slope lot and they put a shoreline strip in and they do it under our vision that it's fully wide enough to stabilize the slope and prevent runoff, and they want to put a deck in there, do we say that they shouldn't have a deck? When they comply with the rest of it, or?
I guess what's the reasoning for not being over 2 feet off natural grade?
I don't know, that was in there historically.
I mean, I think the whole idea was that you weren't going to build like an observation tower. But I don't think.
So the discussions revolve around most of the properties that are adjacent to the lake have a slope to them. So if you're at ground level on the upside, you can't exceed over 2 feet on the downside.
Okay, so if you have a really steep slope, you're gonna have a 3 foot wide deck.
You're gonna have trouble. Right.
Is that something that makes sense?
Probably not.
No, I don't think so.
So penalize the house people.
I think so.
I mean, because they can have a dock that butts into that shore and goes out for however long they want it, as long as it's no more than 6 feet wide. And, theoretically, that dock could be 8 or 10 feet up in the air, still over shoreland or lake.
Right.
So maybe it doesn't make sense.
I just questioned the thinking on it. Somebody thought it would be a good idea to put it in here at one point. And
Let's take it out.
Let's
Let's
do
take it out.
You won your point. I think that's good.
I'm gonna go home.
All right.
Or just take out that whole section.
1.28I,
Yeah.
one,
Yeah, just strike I.
is that I or one?
Well, that's probably one.
It's a one, so not a nine.
Okay. So my comment here deals with presentations from Tip of the Mid and how they go about designing seawalls, particularly their core log ones.
Yeah, that's right.
And they have a whole presentation and format dealing with fetch and wave height and energy on the shore. And obviously, we did this while we were hearing that from them. And the question is, should we consider that in, as part of the ordinance? I don't know that we have the capability of doing that, but I'm not opposed to having expert advice on that issue as part of the review.
Couldn't we say something like, we recommend that as opposed to, revertments or, seawalls, definitely.
That
I
may also,
personally am opposed to seawalls.
right, that might be something that would be best fitting into supplemental site development standards. As opposed to a particular line in this part of the ordinance. I don't know, I think
Yeah.
we need to think around that some more, but I do agree that, you know, living on Lake Michigan, I've seen the effects of when a sage hits. And there is very little that you can do to ameliorate that except it. For those that don't know, a sage is a tidal wave on Lake Michigan. And while that's a stretch for the word, it can be 8 or 10 feet. And, you know, we had one several years ago that took out a structure and actually traveled down Lake Charlevoix and put boats up on the beach and took out a big chunk of Louis Vuitton.
Sure, I had one that did something, a wind that turned my deck upside down.
Right.
I wish I'd known that before I took out my condo.
So, I think this is something we need to consider in some part of the evaluation of the property. Not sure that it's language at this section of the ordinance. All right, Rex, not clear.
Well, I think it's the wording.
Okay.
The shoreline protection strip shall be required on all waterfront lots. The shoreline protection strip shall include all of the land located within 25 to 50 feet of the ordinary high water mark. So does that mean all the land between 25 feet from the ordinary high water mark to 50 feet from the ordinary high water mark? Or does it mean?
So you need to continue reading that sentence.
No, it still doesn't make any sense to me.
So-
You have the ordinary high water mark, right? Then you have something at 25 feet, you have something at 50 feet. What is the shoreline protection strip?
So read
Depending
it.
on the unique characteristics of the property.
So probably what we need to do to make that clear for you is to reference item 8 below.
I suppose you could.
So we could reword that as defined below or as explained below.
Well, I'd say in my comment 11, although this somewhat explains the questions asked about, should width be replaced by depth?
That's fine.
In this, is this width or depth measured along the land or horizontally? You know, in any case, this section means that in the vast majority of instances, SPS is halved in size.
I don't know that, can't say that, because we have to look at each individual property.
Well, is it wise to be doing that if we don't know that?
Well, it's wise to look at the property individually with a set of criteria that says, if your property slopes at a certain level, you need to have this much protection. Now, that's not clear in that wording, I'm entirely open to hearing how it would be worded. But the concept is properties that are flat in the water don't have as much runoff to deal with. It's properties that are steep to the water.
So it's to deal with runoff from water coming off the land.
Right, because the idea
Yeah, I
is,
understand.
right?
If you go to point A, it explains it.
I know, so,
Who created point A?
It came out of a discussion, out of several discussions.
I have a number of discussions.
Was there any science behind
Relatively, some of it came out of, and in talking with Tip of the Mid. Some time ago, and how they calculated shoreline protection strip width. Was a reflection of the, slope to the water and wave energy and a variety of issues. We, in trying to come up with a standard that we could use that was reflective of our current ordinance and reflective of the unique property characteristics, we needed to have a gradient. We can change that gradient. There is not a lot of great science as you put it behind it. But, 50 feet for everybody doesn't make sense.
Right, agreed.
25 feet, which is the standard that Tip of the Mid actually uses in their discussions, even though they talk about 50 feet in their presentation. When you look into the projects that they've listed in the back of their website, most of them are in 20 to 25 foot range. We're trying to find a acceptable common ground with some logical application behind it.
so when you have a steep property, how do you measure the 25 feet or 50 feet? What is it
It
measured?
says down here in the next section. It says the percentage of the slope.
Well, yeah, but, okay, you got land going up like this.
Greater
Are you
than
measuring along the land?
Yes.
Or are you measuring horizontally?
long.
Then we need to say that.
Okay.
I mean,
That's right.
that's,
I mean, to me, the grade to the waterfront means along the line, but
How did we get how did we get to 50 feet as a number?
it's an estimate.
Quite simply, that came from the existing ordinance.
Who created that?
Years ago.
Well, I'm just curious, I mean, if Tip of the Mid's at 20 or 25. Trying to get some understanding here.
It depends on who you ask, to be fair, it depends on who you ask in Tip of the Mid.
They don't have a one position.
Well, they have a political position, so we talk to people that are working on their policy position, they will tell you 50 feet. When you talk to the people that actually do the shoreline strips and reviews and seawalls and that kind of stuff, their projects all come out in the 20 to 25 foot range. So, and when I pointed that out at a meeting, I did not win any friends in Petoskey. But it is what it is. All
Appreciate the insight.
right. Set a comment on wording. He's gone, all right. I'm also under the shelves, that. This is an important issue, and it was addressed.
Where
I moved to the second page, I'm here. I moved to the second page.
Oh my God, it's
Fine.
hard to pay.
Come on. So, this is addressed somewhat obliquely in the existing ordinance 3.14,
with a comment that the scope of the strip should be reflective of the scope of the project. I think this is an attempt to try and work to address those issues. The question that has been raised is, does a project that is far from the water require a full restoration or expansion of a shoreline protection strip if one is already in existence? And I'll give you, for instance, say someone lives on Lake Charlevoix, their house is a couple of 100 feet from the lake shore, and they want to build a storage barn on the opposite side of their house, another couple 100 feet up their property, in larger property. Should that trigger a full shoreline protection strip review and requirement that it go to a full shoreline protection strip? That's the question that's been posed to us with that kind of example. Or should these projects and the shoreline work be in some way related to each other in scope? People.
So you're saying if it's under, in this case, if it's under 250 feet,
I think we asked the person who made the note.
yes, Ron,
That was just a suggestion, and, we, accessory, I don't, never applied to the principal structure, the home. But more applied to accessory structures. We already have limits in our ordinance on the size of accessory structures in the R1 zoning district. So small lots, 900 square feet is the maximum you get, less than 2 acres. It goes up progressively with a lot larger lots, but that gives them way more area. But I think my question is, how much does a 900 square foot accessory building 250 feet away from the lake, how much adverse effect does it have on the lake?
So first off, we need to add accessory in front of structure.
Then we do need to add accessory to that. The principal structure still needs to stay in there. If somebody's building a new house, we have to go through, I feel.
Okay. So we clarified accessory structure. Now you've asked the key question. If someone's building an accessory structure, how much does it impact the quality of the lake? Which then translates into shoreline protection strip.
I think part of the conversation is, as we move down the path here, that rightfully should be considered is the financial imposition that we could be placing upon property owners. If the goals of maintaining the quality of the lake are not impacted in some capacity by a change like this, to then impose a full-on installation of a protection strip or adjustment, I think the taxpayers deserve, they deserve us talking about the financial components to this upon them.
so the whole idea of doing this, saying if you make changes to your property, we are going to examine your shoreline protection strip. If your shoreline protection strip is okay, then nothing's going to happen. If you have a lawn down to the water, then something should happen. And to the answer to Ron, how far, what does it do? It creates more permeable space. If you're building a new structure, say a new barn, even on the other side of your house from the lake, that the width, the area of that roof is more impermeable, and probably driveway and whatever else goes to it it's going to create more impermeable surfaces, which require more filtration.
But I think you have to look at the size of the structure in relation to the size of the lot and how much area. I mean, how much 900 square feet is going to affect when you've got a lot that's 200 feet wide. You know, and you've still got 250 feet to the lake. I think it has to be associated with the size of the structure all the way. But I think there should be some concession. Do I think that what I was saying here, do I think that we should not look at the shoreline? I'm not really saying that. I'm only saying that that it should be in proportion to what they're,
Okay, that's okay.
in proportion to what they're building and how far away it is from the lake.
No, that's okay. I'm just saying,
So we need to work on some language around that proportionality issue. I do hear Mark's comment that we are spending other people's money for this. And in some ways, we're saying, if you want this, then you have to do that, and that's gonna cost you money if you're not already in compliance. So let's just be clear on that and understand that that's what an underlying tenet of this whole section of the ordinance. And then you can get into the whole equity argument. Somebody who's inherited their parents' cabin that had no money into it and they're not particularly wealthy. This is a real financial burden. For other people that have more money than they know what to do with, this is an incidental expense. And that again, might be a way to, or a consideration when we look at individual properties individually. I don't know. But that, by being able to consider many things when you're looking at a property, you're able to come up with a decision that's more likely to be accepted and implemented as opposed to mandated and enforced. And I think that's an important thing for all of us in the township. Okay, so proportionality language, we need to get some help on that. Right. Rex, channel and the structure and shoreline protection strip, I think we beat that issue pretty hard.
Well, we did beat the issue hard, but we didn't decide whether a channel is a structure or not.
Well,
That's a bit,
I
know
let
we-
me answer that. Since we aren't gonna decide whether or not a channel is permitted. In that situation, we wouldn't decide if it's a structure or not, because we're not making that decision. Again, we're dealing with a lake shore. And the shoreline protection strip based on the ordinary high water mark, which we've all agreed moves, if the shoreline, if the lakefront moves.
I think with all due, with respect, I think you're missing the point
Okay.
that I'm trying to make. This section says for any new construction or renovation of a structure. Okay? We don't have to necessarily deal with it here. Maybe we deal with it in the definitional section.
Okay.
But at some stage, because this was the other issue that came up at the ZBA, was whether or not a channel was a structure. And there was disagreement. My recollection is that it wasn't resolved. But we need to resolve it. Do we think that a channel is a structure? I don't. It's a bit of a stretch in my view, because I think that how we define structure, and I don't have it right in front of me, is something attached or permanently fixed to the ground. Well, is a channel fixed to the ground? Well, it's the ground is moved, I don't know.
So, Mike, you've asked a very good question. For me, the key issue is whether or not it's within our jurisdiction because if the Army Corps permits such a channel, they've changed the boundaries of the lake and we control to the ordinary high water. Channel's gonna be on the other side of the ordinary high water mark, so whether or not it's a structure under our definition is irrelevant because it's outside our span of control.
Yeah, but this is a good example of where we can disagree with the Army Corps of Engineers. We can say, screw you, you might say that they can, as far according to our regulations, the US Army Corps of Engineers, that you can dig a channel. We may say, well, no, hell no, we don't want a channel there. And I would argue that if our view is that we don't want a channel there, we can write that into the zoning ordinance.
Let's play this out a little. Someone wants a channel. They go to the Army Corps and the Army Corps does all of their study and they have their public hearings and they do all of their input. And they come back and say to that person or that company or that group of individuals, whatever the applicant is, yes, you can have that channel. And then the township says, no, you can't have that channel. There is a conflict. How is that conflict going to be resolved?
The conflict is resolved by having it in the zoning ordinance from the first place.
That conflict is resolved in court.
Can I make a suggestion?
Sure.
How about if we rephrase that shoreline retaining structures are not allowed above the ordinary high water. Any retaining wall approved by any other agency, any damage to the shoreline needs to be reported.
Needs to be what?
Needs to be, any damage to the shoreline protection strip during that process, just like you have it written down.
Well, let's talk about it.
Requires restoration.
Okay, but let's talk about a situation. I'm good with the restoration part. Where I have a problem is the no structures permitted above the ordinary high water mark. Because in fact, the latest high water on Lake Michigan and Lake Charlevoix have produced waterfronts that need shoreline stabilization that are above the ordinary high water mark. The water moved in, it took out people's land. They need to stabilize it from going in. They're not gonna build a seawall back out to the ordinary high water mark and backfill. We don't allow that. At least I don't think we allow that. And we've had cases where people have come in and say, I need to stabilize what I've got, and it's 4 feet above the ordinary high water mark.
So, how it did, shoreline retaining structures are really quite detrimental to the lake.
No question.
So I think the township should say, no structures allowed above the ordinary high water mark unless approved by other agencies. If Army Corps decides to expand the size of the lake by allowing it at Eagle, we don't have a lot of choices, but we do have to make them restore the shore.
Right. But in that case, Army Corps and Eagle would quite likely say, that's above the ordinary high water mark, and that's not our decision to make. That's up to you and the township. And I think we need to be willing to consider shoreline protections, structures, whether they're rock revetments, metal, corn logs, whatever they are. I think we need to make sure that we keep that option open so that people don't continue to lose property to the lake when the ordinary high water mark doesn't move.
Yeah, but lots to discuss.
We do. If this were easy, we'd have been done months ago. So I think we need to think on that some more. I hear what you're saying. I agree totally that whatever repair is done, it needs to have shoreline protection strip involved. But I think we want to make sure we don't close out inadvertently people being able to protect their water
Well, in some cases, they're home.
Yeah.
You may have.
Yeah. We haven't come to a resolution on the channel structure issue, and I'm not thinking we're going to tonight. So we'll just
Okay.
table that for further use. Next question, permeable material or construction required? And that's permeable material. I think you're actually speaking as an engineer on this.
Well,
What?
there are materials that you can use like these, hexagonal paving stones and things like that. They're permeable when put together while not being permeable
Right.
themselves. So
That's a very good question, because even a deck with deck boards on it. Deck boards aren't permeable, but the space between them is, and we've tended to approve that as a permeable.
Right, and there's, you know, and
so I think you just put in construction.
paving stones
Okay. I defer to your,
that have natural,
permeable construction.
natural fill between them.
Okay,
That's okay.
good, thank you. Ron, visuals. Dealing with the deck.
It brought one more thing about that 2 foot elevation, that one of the other considerations that they had was that, sorry. One of the other considerations they talked about when keeping it at 2 feet was that if it goes above 30 inches, it's required by code to have a handrail. I think they talk about visuals from the lake and walkways that are raised higher, decks that are raised higher, are required to have a railing on them. Construction wise, then it becomes a lot more visual from the lake. That was my count. Is that what we want, or do we want it, they talked at first about just having everything ground level.
Right.
Um,
And as Matt pointed out, ground level isn't always level. I said, as Matt pointed out, ground level isn't always level.
That is correct, that is correct.
I'm not sure, do you have a suggestion on how to address it?
We can build them into the ground, I suppose, and have a retaining wall around them.
Anybody else have any thoughts?
I don't think a railing is that big I would be more interested in the safety of having a railing. I don't think it's. My personal feeling is it's not intrusive view wise. Any house with a deck on it back 100 feet would have a railing, if it was a raised deck. They would have a railing around it. Right, but this is a visual thing.
I like the way it's written.
Well, I think leaving it the way it's written obviates the comment about visuals. It just doesn't. Other, let the building code decide whether or not it's required. I would agree. All right, next one. Your comment about 120 square feet.
Well, my comments were to consider, they don't want you to. You get your 200-foot square deck. And you can't run your walkway past it. The way I read this, it has to be, your walkway has to be in your 200 square foot deck. Which would eat up a big chunk of your deck.
I think the application, as it's been used here before, is that you build your 200 square foot deck and you run your walkway down to it. The idea is not to run the walkway alongside it so that you de facto expand your deck by an extra dimension of 6 feet plus whatever length you're running it along, which gives you that much larger a deck. I think that's what they're trying to achieve with that. And if that wording's not clear, then we should attempt to do so. I don't know what's going on with these mics, sorry.
So the deck, what you're saying is the deck has to be at the end of the walkway and you can't build your deck up from the waterways and then build the walkway down a little further.
It would be, you know, so if you've got, if you've got a deck, as I see it.
Yeah.
All right, if you've got a deck down along the waterway and you run your boardwalk down to it.
Yep.
And then you run your dock off it, you're okay. Where I see it being a problem is if you run your walkway down to your dock and then you build your deck off the side of the walkway, you've created theoretically an extra 120 square feet of deck. Which is, to me, not that big a deal, but it would be in contravention of the limit on deck size. So it's a design issue as much as anything else. Were you gonna say something?
No, just that the walkways have to be perpendicular to the deck. They can't run adjacent to.
Then we need to say it. Okay. Guys, I'm gonna make a suggestion since
Do
it's
you really want to use the word perpendicular? Because then that constrains you to 90 degrees. Some people might want to have a deck like this and then in the walkway in at 45 degrees, for instance. So, I mean,
come up with a word that works better.
okay,
The burden is on you.
okay.
What I'm going to suggest is it's 9:30. I think if we can get to the bottom of this page, we then carry this over to the next meeting. All right, Matt, so this one deals with the use of pesticides, herbicides, and fertilizers. We need to better define in what area it's prohibited.
Yeah, I agree, that's good.
Ron suggested in I that we append this list to the ordinance. I'm fine with that. I'm going to suggest that that stream frontage thing be included in the other topic. Recs shall be left in place for shoreline stabilization, delete whenever possible. Whenever possible only arises in the case where shoreline stabilization issue is raised or the deck or walkway location comes up. We had that discussion previous to your tenure on, because we had somebody that came into the planning commission. We talked about that issue. Again, it's not something I feel super strongly about. If you can design your deck so that you don't have to remove a stump, cool, but it's a bigger issue for your shoreline stabilization.
Yeah, the only point I was trying to make was that, we know what people are like.
No question.
So, if people see it possible, they'll say, aha, this is where I can really work the system, so, I'd strike it. But I understand there was some issue you might have with somebody.
Right, and I'm happy to change that term whenever possible to something that reflects a review that shows a reason for removing it. Okay,
And so,
you guys have any thoughts on that? I mean, we don't want all the dialogue.
No, the only thing I was gonna say is, you know, you got a beautiful pine tree in the front yard, wind block, wind knocks it over, the roots are half out of the ground and everything else at half in. You're really gonna leave them sticking out in the middle of the nowhere, somewhere you gotta build that successful.
Thank you. Place and I had Jay as repetitive with. Okay. And yes, so when we get to I think this is a good place to stop because J and K need to be taken. So are we in consensus that we take this up at the next meeting? Yeah. Okay. Guys, thank you for your discussion tonight. Doesn't, in terms of length, we did make a lot of progress, but we talked a lot about very important issues that go into this whole section of the ordinance. We are next set public hearing dates. Ron, are there any upcoming that we need to address?
We have no application.
Thank you. Next regular planning commission meeting, I have June 18th. Anybody who agree with me or correct me? Good. Okay, thank you. Public comment, 1 minute.
Luann?
It's really quite clear that what you're trying to do is destroy this beautiful ordinance that just you are in many ways. Did you think that we didn't notice that you glossed right over 4.3B? Didn't even talk about it. I've been bringing it up over and over and over again.
We said shall.
No, I'm talking about the rest of it.
Oh, sorry.
That would allow the law boathouse to go through. That one change, that was put in there by someone, Lawyer Ron, put that in there after I won, and all of us won at the ZBA, and this destroys it. You better deal with this. And the rest of it is just a hot mess. And you don't understand the ordinary high water mark, you don't even know your jurisdiction. You do have jurisdiction of the bottomlands of Lake Charlevoix, yes, you do. It's the opposite. Or the Army Corps doesn't have jurisdiction on the other side of the river. We do have that, and you didn't do your
Thank you.
process. Can I just have another couple seconds?
No.
Really? I sat here for 2.5 hours, gave you a lot of advice for free, you can't.
Deb
Another
Martin.
10 seconds?
Thank you. Next,
I'll write you.
thank you. I appreciate the letter. Deb,
We didn't get into the septic field,
not yet.
so that was what I was had a question about.
We haven't forgotten it. We just haven't.
Laura Ford?
Thank you for answering my question that you are taking to heart shoreline protection. What I don't understand though is why all of these revisions. I don't understand why all these revisions are necessary to the ordinance. So, and it's perhaps because I'm naive to that, I'm just moved into Hayes Township a year ago.
Thank you.
But thanks for answering my concerns.
Bill Conklin?
Thank you. What I would recommend each of you is to, you're the one that sets the standard. I heard a lot about conciliatory and consensus. You set the standard. If someone comes in to buy a particular lot or parcel, a wise individual will go to the township ordinance to see what they can do or they can't do. If that lot that they're buying has a lot of cedar trees in it and low lying, and the individual's wife wants a beautiful lawn all the way up to the edge of the lot of the water, up to the edge of the water, and you have a very clear ordinance, let's say it's 100 feet from the high water mark, they will know before they buy it what they can and they can't do. Pigeon River that flows into Malt Lake, you can't do a thing within 150 feet of the edge of the river.
Thank you.
Ellis Bull?
Mark, I have my shoes on.
Thank you. Good to see you.
I would rather not. I don't like wearing shoes. All right, my minute starts now.
Yeah, don't take that time.
The ordinary high water mark is not defined in Article 4, it's defined in the definition section, which you've not reviewed yet. So that's where But if a harbor is created, the ordinary high water mark moves regardless whether the harbor was created by natural forces or by humans. And that's what the ZBA was wrong about, and that's what Rex was right about, how we voted on the matter. The cores, the Corps might permit something, but the township can prohibit it. There's no reason why the township can be stricter than the Corps, so don't get confused about that. And finally, should the setbacks be measured horizontally or along the slope of the land? To be measured horizontally, according to the person I spoke with, the tip of the net was Casey, what their last name? But give a tip of the net about that, should be measured horizontally, even if there's a steep slope. Thanks.
Thank you.
Now I'm taking off my shoes now.
Go ahead.
Oh, don't start the clock until after I say my thank yous. I don't want that to count against me, but I do appreciate all of your discussion and thoughtfulness. And I'm really impressed that you've done your homework. Now we can start the clock. I do have a couple of suggestions because I want to mainly reiterate the concerns that you yourselves have raised. Especially, Mark, your comments about the added responsibility of lakefront owners. I happen to be one, and I get a tremendous amount of runoff from the streets and the hillside, which hits my property. And there's no way I'm going to be responsible for that. Second, the definition of streams and all this discussion, I think that's already well defined, either by the EPA or the state authorities, or the EPA at the federal level. And you can just look at that and copy it, and when you get to the part about writing things for the streams, which I really think is important. And for everything dealing with the ordinary high water mark, take it as a given by.
Thank you.
But the issue is the variance.
Thank you.
That you have to deal with.
State your name.
Oh, I'm Joe Blow from I don't want this to count. My time's up.
Your time's up. Just state your name.
David Kemming.
Thank you.
Okay, Betty, oh, go ahead.
I'm Sherry Nathan Carey. And maybe I'm confused, but the accessory structure, a couple of you talked about gradual improvement with the landowners and increasing compliance, and it just seems like that is a way to gently, bring landowners into compliance with your regulation. So, I thought. Thanks.
Your name, see your name.
I did.
Okay, Betty, if you wanna unmute.
Good evening, my name is Betty Henney, and my many questions have been asked tonight that no one seems really able to answer. A true leader knows when he or she needs help in making decisions. And after listening to your discussion tonight, I believe you need the expertise of a professional planner. It would be a tremendous help to you. The answers to your questions could be answered, and you could be helped in writing a strong ordinance. I hope that you will consider getting expertise in helping you to make decisions. You seem to be really floundering tonight. And I'd like to see a strong ordinance, not a weaker ordinance. Thank you.
All right. That's it.
That's it. Close public comment at 9:44. Planning Commission comment. Who would like to go first? All right, well, you want to say something?
No, I've just been going first all the time. I will try to. No, okay. So I think we have started to define and clarify some things for the future. But also I think people need to know when we are done with these revisions, that hopefully clarify and protect. All this is going back to Beckett and Rader. So this is not over when we're done. It goes to them. And then it'll be reviewed again. So just want to make sure everybody knows it. So, sorry.
I'll ride CT's coattails just for 60 seconds that I think, you know, we have in a lot of ways a very diverse group up here. And I think the conversation is good to go back and forth. We don't have just one opinion. And to walk through the different components of this, I think is very important. And I feel it's of good value.
Gentlemen, you hear me?
I agree, it's a good discussion. Despite what the last public comment said, I don't think we're floundering. We're trying to have a very good, healthy discussion. And we do listen to public comments and take them into account, both those which are written to us ahead of time and those which are said to us here. So I welcome seeing things in writing. And I know it's been said that the agenda and the packet is published at the same time as it's given to us. So every member of the public has as long to consider everything and making comments as we do when we look at the documentation. I think we made a lot of progress tonight. It's at some stage it seemed like we were making glacially slow progress. But when you look back at the broadness of the discussion, the way in which we dealt with disagreements in a healthy way, I think shows that we're a very strong group. And I look forward to continuing this in June.
Thank you. So to address the consultant argument, if we are not writing the final word in these deliberations, what we're trying to do is come up with positioning perspectives that we would take back to the consultant. Consultants don't come in and tell you what you have to do. Consultants come in and ask you, what do you want to accomplish? What are your goals? And then they help you get there. We are refining our goals to do that process. What we wrote, what we send to the consultant may look really different when it comes back. And yet there will be another process where we go through what the consultant recommends. And then, I was counting the other day, I think there's at least 4 or 5 times that this will come back out before it's finally adopted. We look at it, the consultant looks at it, we look at it. We send it out for public comment. We send it to the county for review. Before it goes to the board, there'll be a public hearing. This is not the final word tonight. And for people that are insisting on it for political reasons or whatever their agenda is, trying to back us into a corner saying, you're doing this today wrong, we might be. We are forming opinions on this to send to the consultants. There was another question about, and I'm going to paraphrase it into the buyer beware. You should look at the ordinance before you buy the property. We've had that discussion a lot. And what we found, and I'm not going to throw you under the bus, but what we find is that when people come up to the community and they fall in love with the lakes, real estate agents tell them they can do pretty much whatever they want. And that's the reality we're confronted with. The comment was not wrong. People should do their due diligence and do all that stuff. But the 1 out of 500 that does it is the joy to work with. We're left with the others. So I'm not trying to make light of that. It's just the reality we're dealing with. And we're trying very much to be a reality oriented approach. And so with that, I thank you all for coming and sitting through this tonight. We appreciate your thoughtful comments. There'll be more of this to come. And I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So.
Second.
All in favor? Meeting's adjourned.
Figured out how to wait this. So.
Yeah.
Oh, actually, I have it right here.
I don't know where this one came from.
Oh, okay.
Somebody can take this, it's only.
Oh, yeah, those things just slide out. Thank you. Thank you.
That's what's happening. Well, we're not gonna have a discussion. It's nothing we